Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 691. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, in the SPaMCAST 691, Kevin McKeel talks about using neurolinguistics to aid in software estimation tools. Is this the end of the world for the software estimating profession or the beginning of a golden age? Probably both. Listen and draw your own conclusions. Kevin's bio. Mr. Kevin McKeel has over 25 years of experience in software cost estimation. He is a CCEA and a SAFe Architect and has received the prestigious 2021 Technical Achievement of the Year Award from ICEAA, related to the research of automated software sizing using AI and NLP. Mr. McKeel holds a Bachelor in Business Administration from James Madison University and a Master's in Business Administration from the George Washington University. Are you ready for a little neurolinguistic programming? It's time for the interview. Kevin McKeel, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Kevin, we've actually done some business together. We've worked together a little bit, so I have a pretty good handle on what your organization does and who you are. So, Kevin, the whole idea of artificial intelligence and the role it plays in software cost analysis, how does that work? And I guess let's start with, is what you're doing real AI? Is it part of AI?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we've studied natural language processing. It's a part of AI, but it's not machine learning or neural networks. But what we use, I'll refer to as NLP, to analyze requirements or user stories, which are basically the components that a software estimator starts a project with to develop the software size, frequently using function point analysis. So what NLP does is it tokenizes the keywords, the verbs, the CRUDs, if you will, and it also helps identify the objects that might be data that you're either storing or interfacing with. So all of these are ingredients that within size measurement that an analyst will use to develop that functional size measurement, and that size, of course, supports an estimate using tools or a manual process to come up with FTEs and costs. So I guess I would say, in summary, you can use NLP to speed up some of the repetitive processes of functional size measurement, and then, of course, the analyst has to clean it up and improve it, that the things that maybe the computer's not going to know. They're not going to really know what it means by, what an interface means, what an API means, where there may be, going to be some manual input.
You used a term that you and I know very well, but relatively recently, I've been working with software analysts that didn't know what the term meant. CRUD? Isn't that something you get on your shoe?
It is. I'm showing my age. It stands for create, read, update, and delete. So these are basically database terms, things that a DBA or a system would do. It would either creates information, it reads information, it updates it, or it deletes it. Within functional sizing, those are things that you count. Those are that involves work the developer has to do to do each of those four steps, if you will.
And regardless of, I don't think you're showing your age. I just think that there are things that get dropped out of how people are educated that they have to pick up sooner or later. I mean, that is, I think, a pretty powerful term. Even if you weren't doing database stuff, breaking user stories down, understanding, create, read, update, delete, that sort of stuff, I think helps people break that work down. So, important term. So, tools that are using NLP and perhaps at some point real, decision tree, machine learning, those forms of AI. Does this source out the whole idea of having people involved in software cost analysis?
So I don't think it's definitely not going to, from what I can see, it's not going to remove the analyst. A lot of people in our world are not really sure whether software estimating is a science or an art. The art piece of it would definitely continue. Also, the computer is not perfect. I think you can automate some of size measurement, but the analyst is going to have to go through requirement by requirement to make sure that the machine has interpreted the requirement correctly. So I think there's some time measurement should allow the analyst to focus on sort of key decision making, comparing COTS, low code, custom development, planning a release strategy, prioritizing features, but not necessarily, it shouldn't be quite as much time in developing a functional size measurement.
What's the argument that software estimation, software cost analysis is art versus science? I mean, if you can create a natural language processing that works on some of it, doesn't that almost by definition make it not exactly art?
I would agree. Yeah, I don't think it's art. I think there's an industry of software estimators that have maybe built up the idea that there's an art to it. Because basically, if two experienced software estimators looked at the same requirements, they should come back to basically just about the same size. And then if they're applying a similar productivity measure, they would come up with the same estimate or relatively the same. So yeah, no, I would agree with you. I don't actually think it's an art. I think it is a science, and that makes it, because there is a repeatable aspect to it, that makes it a good target for NLP to have a role.
So if tools-based analysis becomes the norm, doesn't that mean we have to structure requirements, user stories in a very precise way?
I would say that one of the good things about NLP is that we found is that you can identify, maybe you would call it NCOSI requirements deficiency. So duplication, vagueness, ambiguity, compound requirements. So whenever you see this, that means the requirement wasn't written as well. So there should be a process of using these tools to then impart upon the BA or whoever's writing the requirements that it should improve how requirements are written. I don't think it's going to bring back, large-scale upfront analysis. In fact, I think you could probably use machine learning to identify any gaps in your requirements, user stories for previous systems and lessons learned.
So how do you see tools like Cadence working in an agile or discovery-based kind of scenario where your requirements are naturally emerging as work progresses?
When we develop the next release of Cadence, we start thinking to ourselves, how can this support the agile planning process? Your product increments typically on a quarterly basis. So you could use it to come up with size and effort at each PI or possibly even each sprint. And then you could compare that against story points. So I do think it definitely could. There's no reason why you couldn't just use these techniques whenever you had questions on how much capability, how many features you can put into the next sprint or PI.
Why'd you do this? Why build this product, and why did you bring it to market?
That's a great question. Originally, I think it was because I got tired of training people in size measurement. And I just, I would bring, an analyst, and these were usually people right out of college, very smart kids, some development background that just really didn't like size measurement and estimation and got out of it. So they wanted to build software, to be honest. And, we've had people that worked for us that have, gone on to Facebook and, startups. So it's hard to find people that really are interested in software estimating. You don't really study software estimating in college. So I got tired of training people in it. So, and then from people I worked with that would see, the training and explain to me that, hey, there's modern techniques, that this is 5 years ago, with NLP that can be done to automate some of the activities that you're training people in.
So what's been the reaction in the marketplace?
It's been, first of all, a lot of interest, and then just in the technique, just in the idea there. And I'll point out that most of my company and my experience is on the federal side. So like commercial is doing real agile, and the government world, because of the acquisition process and funding and all that, it's a combination of waterfall and agile. So I would say we've got good experience, good exposure to different agencies and contractors that want to use it for software sizing. If I had to say, what does the market want to see more of? It's probably interfacing with tools like Jira. Basically, maybe involving it in a software stack or software factory concept, not just a standalone tool.
So log apps, would you have classified yourself as a company that built software to sell or software as a service? By the way, software as a service delivery model, how are you delivering this?
It's a license subscription on the cloud. So yeah, you call it's SaaS. So I would describe the company Log Apps as a software analysis firm. So we help our customers both on an estimation side, but also on the planning, a lot of AOAs, that kind of analysis of alternatives, that kind of thing. Up until Cadence, we'd not built software. I do not consider us a software delivery firm. It's something we're learning about. In fact, I would argue that I've learned more about estimating from actually trying to build software than I did in 15, 20 years as an analyst.
Yeah, I was about to ask, what was the lesson learned along the way? So was that the big takeaway, that you learned concepts, ideas that you could bring back to the broader organization? Or were there other lessons learned that you would point out to budding entrepreneurs that decide to go down the path of building their own software?
I would say the major lesson I learned is that the sponsor or has an idea. He or she has to explain, do the design, explain to the developer everything that you want the system to do. I think at the beginning, I kind of thought I could just give some ideas to a developer and they would build beautiful software. It didn't really work that way. You really have to roll your sleeves up and do a lot of the design work and show the developer, picture by picture, screen by screen, what this thing needs to do. And then usually the developer can iterate and build that. But you can't just assume that a developer is going to know what your ideas are. You have to break that down and basically do the design work.
So throwing it over the wall is probably not a good idea, regardless of whether or not you're...
No.
I was looking through and trying to get a sense as to what Cadence did. And one of the terms that came up as I was doing my research was the whole idea of project assurance. And while sometimes the word project makes me crazy, how does a tool like Cadence help with ideas and the whole approach to project assurance?
Yeah, so that's something we're working to inject in the tool. Basically, what it will allow would be the analyst to tag user stories with certain terminology, and then through that you could look for gaps, and we've included some of that. So it might be like if you have a mechanism to update reports, you need to make sure that somehow you had where did the data come from? You need to make sure that you included that in your requirements. So it does help identify gaps in requirements, but it's not, I wouldn't actually call it a project assurance tool at this point.
Okay. Well, just the gaps in its own right, I think, can probably save.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, once upon a time, working on a first generation information data warehouse, and picked up from some folks that got shown the door, and instantly recognized that while the data went in, no one had thought about how to get it back out. So it was like we had all the databases. We just had no mechanism to report on it or see into it, and had spent the budget for that. So yeah, I think something like Cadence would have helped originally, and of course maybe that's why everybody got shown the door and got handed off to us. So one never knows. If you woke up tomorrow morning, someone handed you a cup of coffee or your caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand, and gave you the power to change any two things in how projects were done, what would those two things be and why? So
I think it depends what perspective you're coming in at. So if you ask this question to a product owner, an architect, a BA, they're all going to have their own perspectives. But I will come at it from a software estimation standpoint, since that's my background. The second thing is to figure out why are projects failing. Obviously, a lot has been written on this. Some things that jump out to me are unrealistic schedules, changing priorities, and requirements ambiguity. To answer your question, I would like to see greater involvement from the business or user community in requirements and the consistency in how requirements are written. So that gets to the age-old disconnect between the business and the IT. So if the business folks, the users really have input into the requirements, I think that would be great. I've seen situations where the business side would tell you they would disagree with a requirement that was on a requirements traceability matrix that had been already signed off. So making sure that there's greater involvement in the business and how requirements are developed. So that's one. The second thing, and this is probably not the best answer, but estimators always have lack of data. The tools that typically are used, with the models like Sierra, Kokomo, Price, Slim, they're using equations from data for the last 20 or 30 years. But as you know, really with the way technology changes, how software was built 25 years ago is not comparable to how it was built today. So that means the algorithms and formulas approach has to change. So to do that, you need data. You need to know, burn rates, velocity from the developer that you're working with, or at least either your agency or client. So get more information, better availability of information, of data should be available. But I know no development organization really likes to report on themselves. But that's a gap that I see.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all with either of them. If we can go back to the first one for a second, the disconnect between business and the whole development side of the house. Let's face it, that's been, well, heck, it was even mentioned in the Agile Manifesto for those who think that the world began with the Agile Manifesto. But for those of us who've been around just a little bit longer, I don't remember a time when everybody didn't recognize this disconnect as a problem. And it hasn't gone away. Why can't we tackle this issue?
I mean, I definitely think Agile has changed the game and and the disconnect. It's probably improved it. Mainly the whole idea that you're putting software in the hands of the users earlier and earlier, and it's not a big bang. However, I think you have situations where you have unrealistic schedules. You probably aren't falling back on that MVP concept where you're going to have get something that's usable and has some business value out. My sense is that the initial release it's overpackaged and it's buggy because maybe they're not focusing just on the minimum part of the MVP.
Interesting. Phenomenal. Kevin, this has been fantastic. As you know, at the end here, I ask a couple of things. Let's start with the easy one. How can people continue the conversation? I mean, this is deep stuff, and people probably have questions. How would they reach out and continue the conversation?
Sure. Glad to answer that. So I'm active on LinkedIn. Search Kevin McKeel Log Apps as well. I'll pull up on LinkedIn. You can also go to the Log Apps page, www.logapps.com, and there's actually also a Cadence page inside of that. But I would say LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to see what I'm discussing. Certainly, I'll have links to this fantastic podcast, and that'd be one way for anyone to give the podcast a like and hopefully even listen to it.
Super. Well, we'll have obviously the links in the show notes. Kevin, as you know, at this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you like. This has been excellent information for the listeners. The platform's yours for you to promote anything that you'd like. And remember, this is, I think, this will go up early in the podcast's 16th year. So it's been around for a while. Selling your car on eBay this is not the right platform for that. So the platform is yours, sir.
I'll be at ICEAA in 2022. If it's held in person, it's going to be in Pittsburgh, and I think the third week of May. So I'll be presenting with one of my clients, and hope to see anyone there that's in the cost estimation world. And then Beyond that, I would just say, follow the product. Reach out to me if you're interested to learn more about either NLP, how it can support software functional size measurement, requirements analysis, either through a tool demo or just having a coffee side conversation on the future of estimation and size measurement.
Kevin, thanks again for lending your voice to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Yeah, Tom, thanks again for having me. I appreciate your time.
In Reread Saturday News, Week 8 of our reread of Agile Conversations by Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Fredrick concludes our read of Chapter 5, Addressing the Why Conversation. This week, we spent time tackling the concepts of joint design and urging organizations to train team leads in decision-making. They're not second-class citizens. My experiment of the week. Last week, I proposed the experiment of creating a position interest chart during the week. I actually used the technique to help frame an essay for the Software Process and Measurement Cast 690 within 12 hours of proposing the experiment. I also used the ideas in the approach to reframe several discussions during the week. This week, I will try to find a scenario to apply the concepts of joint design. And no eggs will be harmed while applying that concept. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 692, what would you call a person with little training, a lot of responsibility, and little to no real authority? This is not a dad joke. I suggest the answer is often a team lead. We'll also have Mr. Tony Timble back to talk about user stories in his To Tell a Story column. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask? Are we there yet?